Cast 2021's panel on 55 years of Gamer versus Barugon. I am your co-host, Kenton. With me is your other co-host,
Jason. What's going on, everyone?
So here we are talking about another movie with a significant milestone, the second film in the Gamera saga. I can count. Gamera versus Barugon. And once again, just kind of a disclaimer, as we have done with all of the anniversary panels, which is most of them during this Daikaiju Fest, we are not going behind the scenes of these films. We feel like, first and foremost, we've talked a little bit about them in the past when we've discussed these films originally. Not to mention there are other podcasts and other resources you can go and visit and read. Are going to do a better job of covering all that than we are here. The main purpose of these anniversaries is to just kind of celebrate and acknowledge and discuss these films in terms of just kind of for us to once again just revisit the films, and also what we think any sort of legacy, if necessary, that such films have left. So it's kind of a celebration and acknowledgement of such films. Unfortunately, yeah, a couple of the anniversary films we have done, have been sadly a little bit more negative. But again, you like what you like. We acknowledge them anyways, so it's not like we ignored them, which would have been an even bigger slap in the face. But Jason, why don't you start us off on Gamera versus Barugon?
Yeah, with Gamer vs. Barugon, it's been, I think it was in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I was the ones that basically discovered the whole Gamera franchise to the both of us. And I know with Kent here, he was kind of a bit hesitant.
I will admit, and I think I've said this several times on the podcast, I was a purist and a snob. I thought anybody who tried to imitate Godzilla was terrible, no good, very bad day. And that's how I felt about Gamera for the longest time.
Mainly a snob. But
I was.
With Gamer vs. Barugon, I believe that this was the second overall Gamera film that I've watched, and I think it was. I can't remember if I bought it along with the original one or if it was kind of piece by piece. But I remember watching this movie for the first time, and I'm not sure if this was sort of the introduction for you or could have been one of the other Gamera movies that got you started into the whole Gamera franchise. But I remember watching this, I remember really enjoying this movie, and I really liked the cast. And I think that was probably one of the more memorable ones, is the cast, especially Kojiro Hongo, which I kind of dubbed as the Akira Takarada of the whole Gamera franchise, but sadly, I wish he could have been in the franchise more than what he was throughout the entire length of the franchise. And I think this was his last appearance in the Gamera film.
No, it wasn't, because he was in the next one, Gamera versus Gauss. He was also the No Supper camp counselor in Virus, and then I think that one was indeed his last one, because he was not in Giron. He was not in Jiger nor Zigra nor So Virus was the last one.
Yeah, it and also kind of what you led on there with some of the other films after this one. It just seemed like they really downsized his role in the franchise, and I think that out of the movies that we've seen, even outside of the Gamera franchise, I think this was one of his best leading roles ever, and I wish that they could have cast him more in the main character role in some of the other films that he was casted in. But other than that, the story, I really liked how they did the story, the plot, and as well as the practical effects and the visual effects. I think they really melded with one another, in my opinion. It just felt really good, and even after all this time, it feels like uh, both the practical and the visual effects have aged pretty damn well.
Yeah, I mean, I remember even back when I first started watching these earlier Gamera films, I already, when it came to films such as this one, and at the time even Giron and even Jiger, I was already starting to be a little sold on the Gamera property. Um, Gamera versus Barugon, I'm an apologist for, and I know it's not a lot of people's favorites in the West. One of the reasons a lot of people don't like it is they say there's not enough Gamera in it. But I tell people there's a lot of Barugon in it. There's still a lot of kaiju action in it. Not only that, it's similar in a way to Monster Zero, in which you have really good characters like you were talking about. The thing is, unlike Monster Zero, there is more monster action overall in this one than there is in Monster Zero. One thing I will quickly mention here, just to kind of put it in context in case some out there are unaware of, what Dai wanted to do for the second film was to, or excuse me, to produce it for a more adult-oriented audience, which is part of the reason why we get the story and some of the characters that we do
I
get.
think that's what it boils down to. I think is what works is that they kind of geared it more towards kind of the adult side, and then
Yeah.
sort of after that they went more towards kids and just
They went back more to the kids because this film did not perform as well at the box office as they had hoped. And if it did, who knows? The Gamera franchise probably would have ended up being, would have had maybe another one or two entries, perhaps, that would have been more adult oriented. We'll never know. But yeah, the reason why I went solely back, to being kid fare was just because it didn't sell as many tickets. And as anybody who is aware of kind of the trajectory of the Japanese movie business during this time, which would have been entering just into the it's still kind of mid 60s, but just entering the latter half of the 60s. Already, like, the golden age of kaiju films was kind of coming to an end. A lot of it was just because the films were already starting to do just a little bit less at the box office. TVs were becoming more available for Japanese citizens. Many Japanese citizens were buying them. Hence, more adults were staying home and going to the theaters less. And as we moved into the late 60s and on into the 70s, most films were kind of geared more towards children, because a lot of parents, as anybody who's a parent knows, that you just kind of, tired of your kids and you just want to send them away for a while. So you send them to the movie theater all day, and they have, these movies that are more geared towards children. And so that's kind of what was already happening at this point. And Dai was just starting to realize this at about this time. But I've always been a huge fan of this film. Like I said, I'm an apologist for this. I think it is the best produced Gamera film out of the Showa era. And I think even when I compare it to the Heisei trilogy and even Gamera the Brave, my personal favorite Gamera film, I think it goes toe-to-toe really well against those films as well. Sure, some people are going to say, well, certain things here don't look as good as that. Well, yeah, I mean, what, 30, 40 decades passed, from Barugon into like Gamera 2, and, of course, things are going to be different. But I think this is an incredibly well-made film. I love the characters. I love the story. There's an interesting kaiju. The whole rainbow ray coming out of its spine, I think, is incredibly goofy, but that's one of the reasons why I love it.
And then this kind of tongue-looking thing that comes out of his mouth.
Chameleon type of...
Yeah.
Yeah, the chameleon-like tongue that freezes. What a weird power to have, like a tongue that freezes.
Well, speaking of chameleon, his whole kind of design aspect seemed like it was sort of inspired by a chameleon in a way.
In many ways, yeah, I'm sure that's where, by and large, it was based off of. And you take a look at much of the Showa era Gamera series, most of his foes are quadrupeds. And when you notice in this film, when Gamera is in the scene, he spends most of his time on all fours as well. Here are gorgeous. The film opens up with Gamera coming out of that capsule from the end of the first film, and the first thing we see is him attacking this dam, and I mean dam. It's a gorgeous scene. I mean, this dam was huge to begin with. It looks incredibly realistic. This was an effect that they would use as stock footage in like 3 or 4 other Showa Gamera films. And when Barugon first comes out and rises out of the bay in Kobe, um, that the whole miniatures, the Kobe Tower there, and the rest of like the harbor and the inner city are just incredibly well done. And then even the rest of the film, when you get some of the rural areas and even some of the self-defense force vehicles and bases being shown in future scenes, it is just gorgeous. And then at the end, for the ending battle, that giant lake there with a bridge going across it, the effects were, and then of course too the castle there too, where Gamera and Barugon have their first encounter. It's a simply gorgeous, well put together film with exceptional effects work. And I cannot give this, I could sit here for the next few hours and just gush over the effects on this film. They are very well done and they're gorgeous.
Yeah, and even after 55 years, again, it just feels like that the effects, both visual and practical, have really aged pretty damn well, especially for a movie that.
And there aren't a ton of visual effects here.
Right, yeah.
And most, yeah, like 95+% of it is all practical. There are very few shots where there are composites. There are very few shots where they would have to go in post-production, do like, let's say, the rainbow ray for Barugon. Of course, that was one of them. But by and large, like basically everything was practical. And this is simply magnificent. This particular Gamera film, even for this particular time in Kaiju Eiga, it's so much better than many of the effects done for Godzilla films roughly around this time. And this film I have always held up as not just one of the better Gamera films, but one of the best earlier Kaiju Eiga films, and a Kaiju Eiga film that, like you said, starting out, still holds up incredibly well today. I mean, this film is timeless. It just good. It's well written. There was a lot of care put into it. This is magnificent. I mean, this might be a short panel here because I have few, if any, complaints about this film. It's just about as perfect as you can get.
And I probably would say too is that probably one of the reasons too is that with it being Dai, a different studio and smaller one for that fact and matter, they probably didn't have a whole lot of time constraints compared to Toho, whereas probably during around this time and even a year beforehand that they've constantly producing a lot of the kaiju films, and I think with this they probably took the time and the liberties just to try to pan things out, even though it was that this film was made a year later from the first movie, but it felt like that they at least taken the time to plan things out, writing up and developing the characters and the stories for this, and taking the time for post-production as well.
Well, they did have some extra time because Kojiro Hongo, when he was cast for this film, he originally didn't want to do it, so he faked himself being sick. And so then the studio said, okay, we'll wait. Because he thought maybe if he was sick, they would cast someone else. And they just said, no, we'll wait. So,
and also this was the same year when he was also doing the sequel for Daimajin.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's talk about characters here. I mean, we've already kind of talked about Kojiro Hongo and how good he was. Um, Kyoko Inami as Karen is really good. I always get kind of a kick as I always get a kick out of her one scene when Hongo ends up fighting Onodera at one point and he gets like a cut or something like on his arm. And I remember this too from odd number of years ago at G-Fest when they would have the Goohead Gamera where they would show various Gamera films. And this was one of those films. And she, after the fight was done and Onodera like fled, Karen bends down to where Hongo's arm is, starts sucking the blood, but the way it's filmed, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. It looks like she's giving him a blowjob. And then when she brings her head up, she kind of has this seductive look on her face, and like one little like bit of blood is like on the corner of her mouth. It makes her look like a seductive vampire. And then Hongo just kind of looks longingly in her eyes, and he just kind of takes his thumb. Blood from her face like that. And I'm just like, holy God, we got a porn going on here.
That's quite what we expected.
That is I would argue it's probably the weirdest moment in any Gamera film ever. It's funny, but at the same time, really weird as well. And in fact,
some of the scenes in Super Monster Gamera.
Super Monster Gamera is a child's film that plays on that wackadoo type of mentality that kids have. So that I'm more forgiving of that. But it's like, you guys didn't realize as you were setting these shots up and kind of in your mind how it would look that, it would come across. Then
if it's in the final product, they probably didn't realize it.
Or they didn't care. One or the other. But
if it was a bit too late and they sort of, like one of them sort of thought about that, who knows?
Well, yeah. And the villain in this film, Onodera, played by Koji Fujiyama, is such an asshole, and I love to hate him. He is one of the greatest Showa era villains of all time. This is a guy who would play in future Gamera films, either as a head of a self-defense force team, or in the case of Zigra, which we will be discussing in this Daikaiju Fest, as one of the main protagonists, and he's very likable. So that tells you how Koji Fujiyama, how good of an actor he is. He's also the heavy in the second Daimajin film, which we just talked about a moment ago with Hongo, and he is.
And I would also.
I very much like to hate him in that film too.
And I was also dub Koji Fujiyama, who plays as Onodera, the Kenji Sahara of the Gamera franchise. Because
I mean, he's magnificent here.
Yeah, because the reason is that he's pretty diverse as far as the roles that he takes. Just like Kenji Sahara, where he's really good playing as the villain, but also pretty damn good playing as the protagonist.
Yeah, I mean, he's just he's a great actor, and he plays villains very, very well. I mean, he's incredible in this film, and I love to hate him. When Bairogan ends up eating him, thank God that guy's out of here, because I hated him. He was a bastard. He beat up a handicapped guy.
Yeah. But as far as the score to Gamera vs. Baragon, Um, I think it's really good, and it also fits to kind of the whole theme or the overall look and feel to what the film uh, gets into in a ways. Although I haven't really heard much of the soundtrack or the score since the last time I've viewed Gamer versus Baragon, but it really, if I can remember, that it really does fit it pretty damn well, and I forget who does it. Shuji Kinoshita.
Chuji.
Uh, yeah, Chuji. I'm not sure if he's sort of the regular of the Gamer franchise or if this was sort of his
I can look that up here.
solo uh,
I can look
bit.
that up here. The first one had a different composer. Gauss had the one from the first movie. I'm not going to go through all of them here. I think, yeah, I don't think he returns because this was a completely different film. Because we have to remember that Yuasa, Noriaki Yuasa, who directed the first film and would then go on to direct Gamera versus Gauss all the way through Super Monster Gamera in the Showa era. He was actually the special effects director for this film. This was the only Showa era Gamera film he did not direct. He was not like the overall director. And as a result, of course, you get a different director, you're more than likely are going to get a different composer coming in as
Maybe,
well.
yeah,
But
maybe they
the
should.
score is still really good here. I mean, and I like the look. I love the rest of the films in the Gamera series, although Zigra and Super Monster leave quite a bit to be desired. But the the rest of the series is still a lot of fun, even though it's kiddie fair. But I have to say that the direction done here by Shigeo Tanaka is fantastic, and it's a incredible disappointment that this film didn't do as well in theaters as they had hoped, because I think Asa has done very well in the Showa era as a director. I will argue, though, I think he's better as a special effects director than he is a director here, at least for these Gamera films, because, again, as I gushed over here 5-10 minutes earlier, the effects for this film are gorgeous. They are indeed the best that you're going to get out of the Showa era Gamera films.
Yeah, and it's also a bit disappointing that they didn't bring back Shigeo to direct more of the Gamera movies, but of course, uh, they just want to gear back more towards kids, and as well as during this time, the TV portion was becoming more prominent in Japanese homes rather than theaters, and then of course the theater attendance was starting to decline during this time.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, again, it just had everything to do with the box office performance. I mean, I think from a critical response, I think by and large, it did pretty decently in terms of critical response. I mean, I'm kind of just quickly glancing over some stuff here. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's not overwhelmingly positive, even though it should be. But I mean, it's does pretty well. I mean, again, here, one person complaining about lack of monster battles, but I think, again, you got good enough human characters that carry the story to the point to where you're invested in their journey. Again, like I said, it reminds me a lot of Monster Zero. Although, again, this film has more monster action overall than Monster Zero, but the human characters in both films are good enough to where when monsters are not on screen, you're with it.
Yeah, and then one of the critical responses I was just glancing at right here, whereas like one of them from Variety that was reviewing the film that said the visual effects were not up to standards Toho's E.G. Tsuburaya, and I would completely disagree with it. I think it's sort of on par or on the level, or possibly perhaps maybe a little bit better per se to E.G. Tsuburaya's standards, and I think, and as I've said before, that after 55 years, the visual effects for this film has aged pretty well.
At the time this film was being produced and released, you had Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, a nostalgic favorite of ours. But look at that film. They Toho already realized, look, the Godzilla films aren't, the adults aren't really coming to these anymore. We're going to have more kid fare. They had fewer miniatures. A lot of it was island, hence more trees and dirt type of miniatures. Here you got whole cities.
And then right around this time too, you had Ultraman.
Well, and not only that, but then too, the actual, even if you were to compare, let's say, the miniatures in this film to, let's say, the miniatures in Mothra versus Godzilla, or even, let's say, Destroy All Monsters, I will argue, like we already talked about, and I talked about this a little bit ago at the near the top of the panel, the effects at the very least are on par with what Tsuburaya and his crew were doing at about the same time. I will argue, though, this is better than most of the Godzilla films were doing within like a couple year area there, because they're phenomenal here. I don't know what movie this guy was watching. Maybe he was watching the Sandy Frank version of this film or something, but the effects here and miniatures, I will argue, are superior to the Godzilla films at the same time.
Yeah, and then even with Godzilla vs. Monster Zero, which is loved by almost any kaiju fan out there, with this being made a year later, and then looking at the miniatures and everything, I'd say that's even on par with that film, if not better.
Yeah, it's on par with at least that film. But Monster Zero, though, was using some stock footage from previous films. It was using stock footage from Ghidra, and it also was using stock footage from Rodan. This film has no stock footage. It's all, filmed, produced for this film. That's what it was.
You can see one of the reasons why a lot of the later Gamera films use quite a bit of stock footage from this, because a lot of the miniatures from this movie were damn good.
Yeah, I mean, stock footage was used from this one and the first one mainly. Once in a while, you'll see something probably from Gauss. And Gauss had really good effects work too. Even when they went back to kind of more kid fare, that one is towing the line where it's kind of violent and gory in some aspects, where I would even consider it's kind of a combination of adult and kid fare. Even that film, I will argue, because that was 1967. You're talking Son of Godzilla time frame. Again, Daiei is still like, look, we're creating miniature cities and stuff here. Toho's off doing 2 island Godzilla films, both of which I like. Don't get me wrong. I like those 2 films. But the miniature work is so much less significant than what you get here in both Baragon and Gauss. That person is wrong. I will say it. You're entitled to your opinion even if it's wrong, and that person is wrong. That's what I'm saying, and I'm sticking to it.
So, with that, is there anything else to add on to our discussion of Baragon?
I want to quickly just touch upon the legacy of this film and the fact that it has, at least in the West, has always been, I think, underappreciated and overlooked. Again, we kind of touched upon this earlier in the discussion that because there isn't a ton of Gamera in this film, a lot of people just kind of poo-poo it. But again, like I said, you still get a lot of Baragon, and you have incredible human characters that are actually fun to watch, and you're actually rooting for them. Again, it's like Monster Zero. You have great characters that kind of carry you through until the next bit of monster action. And again, the effects work here, is absolutely incredible. You get even effects work in some scenes with the humans, even when there are no monsters on screen. But once Baragon shows up, I mean, it's basically his movie from that point until the very end. And I have no problem with Gamera not being in here because, again, I like the characters. I'm entertained all the way through. I mean, I'm fine. It's just like Monster Zero. Monster Zero, anybody who's paid a long enough attention to this podcast knows Monster Zero is in my top 5 or 10 favorite Godzilla films. I watch that film multiple times every year. It's one of my personal favorites. That film has the least amount of kaiju action in it than any other live action Godzilla film up to this point in time. And it's one of my favorites. You want to know why? Because you got terrific actors whose characters are written very well, whom I relate and or cheer for, and as a result, I am entertained up until you get to any sort of monster action that does come down the pipe. So, yeah, it's just it's disappointing that you have all fans here in the West. We really pride on really appreciating practical effects, and that's great. But then at the same time, they don't see the forest for the trees. They focus so much sometimes on, do I see a monster or not, that they miss the fact that you still get great effects footage. You get certain cities, you get certain landscapes, you get certain sets like the cave or the forest here or whatever. There's still a lot to see here and to appreciate. And it's just disappointing that fans just continue to kind of glaze over this one. It is such a fabulous film on so many levels.
And I think it's the same thing when it comes to the actors and actresses, is that, we get a lot of respect for all those that play the roles in these films, but yet they sort of, as you say, that they sort of glaze over that, and it's like, are there monsters? Like, how long are the monsters in this, or are there going to be good battles in this movie between the kaiju and all that? And that's sort of the other thing too, is that they respect or praise the visual effects and the actors and actresses that are in these films, but yeah, they sort of kind of glaze over it when they see these films.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, because I've been a kaiju fan long enough, and I've been involved with and observed the community long enough to know that, yeah, there are a lot of things that are said, and on some level things are followed through, but mainly what it comes down to with the fans is, do I see monster, and is monster on screen enough and doing enough punching to keep me entertained? um, that's basically what it boils down to kind of put the whole fandom in a nutshell. Those are the two things that really matter to the fandom at most, and that's fine. But then don't tell me that you really appreciate these other things over here, and then even when you still get them, even when there's no monster on screen, that you start poo-pooing that. Like, there's hypocrisy there, and that's something that really shines through. I mean, we've talked about it before with other films, like Shin Godzilla, and then we've talked about it with the 98 film. We've even talked about it, I think, occasionally to some degree with like Godzilla 2000. And even this film, you have films where there's still some good, if not great, things happening on screen, even when there may not be a monster there or whatever, or certain expectations are completely contrary to what you have said before, that nothing seems to match and fit together. And I think that's fine as long as you acknowledge that.
I think that's sort of the same thing when it comes to the legendary films.
So don't even get me started on that. I mean, it's just...
we'll save it for another time.
Yeah, all I'm going to say about that is that, especially with kind of the final couple entries, at least in the Godzilla trilogy of that, by and large, you were given what you asked for, and as a result, you still poo-poo. I mean, it's frustrating, to just see all that, because not only are fans' expectations always changing, and I got this really cool little piece of graphic that I found off of a superhero group that I follow on Facebook that explains the kaiju fandom perfectly, where it's like you ask for this, but then you keep moving the goalposts. And it's basically what it comes down to is that people are never satisfied. And I'm a simpleton. I'm not afraid to say that I'm a simpleton because I'm someone who, you give me something, I will always give you credit at least for effort if it seemed like you put in effort. Again, I've said that about GMK. I've said that about Shin Godzilla. I will give you an A for effort. Execution is a totally different matter. And, again, I was not entertained by those films. I did not like where those films went. And as a result, they're two of my least favorite Godzilla films. And, but I will always give you effort, and in those films I could tell, yeah, the people who worked on them tried anyways. And the unfortunate thing is that a lot of fans, unfortunately, when it comes to this particular Gamera film, don't even give that. It's a forgotten film that was given a decent sized budget for the time, and you can see all of it on screen. And it's a gorgeous film, not just visually, but even in substance from beginning to end. And it's just so frustrating and disappointing that even the effort is not even acknowledged. It saddens me and frustrates me an awful lot because this, I think, should be one of the films every kaiju fan who is familiar enough with the Godzilla series, the Gamera series, and other areas of tokusatsu, kaiju eiga, that this should be one of the films held up as one of the best early kaiju type films. And it's not. It's kind of like what we've talked about with Godzilla versus the Sea Monster. It's just kind of glazed over. People don't even really acknowledge it most of the time, and that's frustrating.
So is that your
But
final
I've
thoughts?
rambled enough. I've rambled enough. I know I do tend to ramble, but I had to say it because not only do I love this film, but I do think it's a very well made film.
And
And I just have to say though, no, go ahead.
so
But no, seriously, no. Go ahead.
so I'm guessing that was probably your final thoughts. So what was your out of 10? How would you give this?
I give it a 10. I mean, this is hands down not only one of my favorite Gamera films. I think it is one of the better made Showa era kaiju films. And it's still, like I said at the top of this discussion, I think it goes toe to toe in terms of execution. Gamera films, and including my personal favorite, Gamera the Brave. And like I've said a couple times before in this discussion, I think the effects work and all that is actually a step or two above of what was happening in the Godzilla franchise at this time. I mean, this is an exceptional movie.
Yeah, and while you were rambling on there, I was trying to I was trying to think of some negatives on this film, and in the end, I seriously just can't think of anything at this point in time as far as negatives towards Gamer vs. Baragon, because essentially that's basically how good this film is. With the good writing, good cast, visual effects, just really good direction overall for this film. Even, I would say I'm not sure how much time that they had, between the launch or the, wrapping up from the first film all the way to the release of the film. As far as laying the groundwork for Gamer vs. Baragon, but just essentially, how everything just went on, I think just made this film really good. And also, it's just one of those films that is just hugely underrated in my eyes. And I think that a lot of people just need to take a second look at this film and just really look at it, with a different mindset instead of just, oh, how long is Gamera in this film, or are there going to be, any good battles between Baragon and Gamera and the such. To me, it's just you have to look at it, overall with how the story is set, and also to me, I think you need to look at it with, through the cast and, kind of more of appreciation of what they're doing than just watching the movie just for the practical and visual effects in the monster battles.
I want to quickly add before you give your final rating and other thoughts you may have. If you haven't already, buy the Blu-ray set from Arrow Video, because here I think within the last 8 or so months they finally have, because that original Gamera Blu-ray set that they brought out, the one big giant box, sold out so fast that, eventually they were going to release them in separate smaller sets. Those have been out for a while now. If you haven't already and you missed out on that first big box set, pick it up, because not only do they look really good in Blu-ray, there are some really nice extras and bonuses with these Blu-ray sets that I think will give you a greater appreciation, not just for this Gamera film, but any others that you are maybe meh or mixed about. Because sometimes, and I've noticed this with myself, sometimes where if you are on the fence about a film or negative, and if you learn a little bit about the production, if you learn a little bit about kind of, the directors and the writers were trying to pick their brains and figure out where they were going initially, and then just kind of figuring out execution, sometimes that can have an impact on your enjoyment of a film, because you have this knowledge of, like, I see what they were trying to do here, and this was going to go here, that is what was being said here, and what they were trying to accomplish. Like, when you get some of that background and you get some of the context of kind of what was happening, not just during production, but even its response by audiences at the given time that it was released, sometimes that can influence you in a good way, sometimes negative, but usually for me it's positive.
But yeah, as you've mentioned here, that it rivals some of the Godzilla movies at the time, and I would say too, yeah, I would say Gamera vs. Baragon is probably one of the better or best, perhaps, kaiju films of that time. And just basically, as far as, the story, the characters, practical and visual effects of that time, and just, with the timeline, with what they had, and even the budget-wise, with the 80 million yen budget, they did a pretty damn good job with what they had. So with that, out of 10, I would also give this movie a 10.
All right, and so with that, we conclude our panel on 55 years of Gamera vs. Baragon. We hope you enjoy the discussion, and we hope you continue to enjoy the rest of Daikaiju Fest 2021.
And with that, we'll see you in the next panel. Take care.